This is Chapter 13, Discussion Number 2, Imperialism Imposes on Southeast Asia. In the previous section, we heard about Japan and how it learned the lessons of Western imperialism and brought them into their culture and expounded upon them and actually successfully executed them to become, in and of itself, a great military economic power. The rest of Southeast Asia and the Pacific Rim did not learn those lessons, and so they also were overrun by the Western powers and Japan once it finally gets that far. Because Europe, again, is still looking for raw materials, still looking for new markets for their finished goods. As the Industrial Revolution produces more and more items, they need to be sold somewhere. Specifically, let's look in the Dutch East Indies, which we now know as Indonesia. The British expanded also through this area in India, into Burma, into the Malay Peninsula. The French established ports and eventually colonies in Indochina, which is what we now call Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, as all of these European powers are establishing bases of operation. Of course, while these colonies in and of themselves are going to be highly productive, the Dutch East Indies are going to be major oil producers. The rest of these areas also serve as safe havens for navies as they're going to the big one, China. And all the trade that they have carved up in China during this time period, these are the ports that these major Western powers are establishing in order to have ports of call along the way in order to replenish their navies. Now, there was one country that actually was able to successfully maintain its dependence. It was the country of Siam. We now call it Thailand, mainly because their Western leader, who read Western books, was able to withstand the European imperialism by maintaining his independence. He didn't go the shogun route where he was being used by the Western powers in order to maintain his power. He was powerful in and of himself. He did not go for that kind of thing, and so therefore they were able to maintain their independence. A couple of other countries to talk about was the Philippines. Now the Filipinos were tired of the Catholic Church essentially pushing everyone around. The Catholics had successfully sent missionaries to the Philippines. They had then established themselves as being essentially the organizers of that culture, and the Filipinos were like, wait a minute, we are Filipinos. We are not people who want to be Catholics like Spaniards. So they started revolting against that organization. During the Spanish-American War, which happened in 1898, the United States went into the Philippines trying to kick the Spanish out. The Filipinos were more than willing to help the Americans to kick the Catholic Spanish out, and the United States had promised to these locals that they would be able to become their own country with their own government. And then the United States, after the Spanish-American War, then didn't give the Filipinos their self-rule. Now, the United States said that they were trying to establish in a mandate fashion. You're going to hear that term later on. But mandate means is that a country, a Western country or an organized country, will oversee a conquered country or a captured country and help them establish themselves, get their bureaucracy set up for them, with the United States power helping, until the Filipinos were able to establish themselves and be able to run their government, not just say, okay, it's yours, and then leave that country to fend for itself. We have several different instances in modern history where this has been the case. We take a look even what the United States did with Iraq, where we stayed there for a while in order to help them get established. We did the same thing in Afghanistan, and then we said, okay, you're ready to go, we're going to leave. And so that's kind of what the United States thinking was during the process. Of course, the Filipinos were ready now, and the Americans were, we're not thinking you're quite ready yet. And so we do have that conflict there. Eventually, the United States does leave, and the Philippines become their own country. Another interesting concept that we're going to run into is the islands of Hawaii. Now, Hawaii was originally discovered by the British. It had essentially been allowed to exist on its own. They had their own queen, their own government. However, what we see is a lot of American investment into the Hawaiian Islands. In fact, there's one island that even today is completely owned by an American corporation, the Dole Company. That's where you get your bananas and your pineapples. And a lot of sugar growers also established plantations and sugar farms on the islands of Hawaii. And the Americans who ran these wanted to become part of the American country and not be subject to the whims of this local Hawaiian government. So they decided to overthrow the Hawaiian queen, and then they said, okay, we would like to be now part of the American country, and the United States was more than willing to accept Hawaii as a territory in the United States country. So by 1900, the United States had the Philippines, we had Hawaii, we also added the island of Samoa. As the United States starts drawing out, getting out beyond its continental borders and start seizing territories in the same way that the European countries were, to establish a presence beyond the home country. This concludes discussion number 2 of Chapter 13, Imperialism Imposes on Southeast Asia.